Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on the Bell UH-1 Huey. Today I'm here to provide for you a financial perspective on how the Bell Huey became the DC-3 of the helicopter world. Now, what I do with my published work on military aviation is I use it as a teaching tool. And based on my financial expertise, what I strive to do is incorporate a fusion of military aviation, strategy, and finance with the express purpose of honoring the past and in doing so, advancing the future. So I've done this approach with a lot of different type of aircraft, some going back all the way to World War II, some of more recent vintage. But for reasons that will become self-evident, this one is high on my list. And what I try to do in my work is there are 2 points of differentiation. One is that I'm able to craft a narrative that is understandable, it's relatable, that encompasses the investment merits of a given aircraft. But the second thing, which is where my training comes into play, is to be able to actually deconstruct and tell you what the actual economic added value is from that individual product line. You might not think that that's a very big deal because the SEC requires publicly traded companies to disclose operating segment information, and that's the key. It's operating segment information, but not product line information. So consequently, what I was able to do is that in the case of the Bell Huey helicopters, I can tell you specifically what the contribution was from that specific product line. When I followed the Boeing company, what the contribution was from the 747 and other aircraft, and I can do the same and have done the same for other companies. And that's pretty important because that information tends to be obscured in the context of documents that are provided to the financial community and the public at large. So my role is to try to deconstruct that and to try to present a different perspective on understanding the aircraft beyond the enormous technical capabilities and military accomplishments that they have achieved in the course of our nation's history. So as it applies to the Huey, my narrative is this. It can be encompassed with one word: value, which in this case is an acronym. It really incorporates several important elements that make it the DC-3 of the helicopter world. First and foremost is versatility. Second is adaptability. Third is longevity. And finally is uncommon excellence. So that's the overarching theme that we will use. And we're going to delve into each one of these components that make up the acronym to understand what makes the Huey a case study of value. The backstory as to why I wrote this piece is represented by this very handsome monument that was recently erected in honor of the helicopter pilots and crew members who served in Vietnam. And this was recently erected at Arlington National Cemetery, and when I saw that it finally went up after a great deal of consternation and all the red tape that it requires, when I saw this monument, it inspired me because I've had the opportunity in the course of my research to meet and talk with a lot of participants, just like many of you here today who served in combat and have incredible testimonies that have been shared with me. And I thought, you know what, it might be kind of fun in honor of those who gave the full measure of devotion, that it would be great to write about this aircraft that represents not only what they gave, what they sacrificed, but represents an important part of our nation's history. So this was the backstory, and I just want to mention here for the record that Textron, which is the holding company that owns Bell helicopters for more than 70 years, they cooperated with this. Now, when they work with financial analysts, they cannot endorse the work, nor can they really give you too much guidance beyond what is publicly disclosed. But what they were very kind to do for me was that they gave me access to archives of financial information from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s that enabled me to do a deep dive into the subject matter. And probably as a little tip of the hat, and I don't say this to pat myself on the back, but to me it was an acknowledgement that I accomplished my objective. When it was all said and done, they asked for copies so they could distribute it to their worldwide sales network as a historical document for their legacy aircraft. So they can't endorse your work, but in a sense that's a tacit endorsement, so I feel grateful for that acknowledgement. But most importantly, I want to say that this monument really spoke to me, and when I heard the testimonies from those who flew it in combat, as well as those who were involved in its design and development, it's quite a story. And the story here really begins by looking for comparables. One of the things that I always like to do in the course of my work and teaching is to identify comparable situations. And so consequently, what I like here is that the DC-3 is an example of not only being a world-renowned brand, but also being resilient and solidly profitable. This aircraft, and this is the model here that we see at the Palm Springs Air Museum, was built in the 1930s. And so you have an aircraft that has been around since the days of Franklin Roosevelt and continues to serve worldwide in a lot of venues. And so consequently, we look at the DC-3 as sort of the standard of excellence, not the gold standard, but the platinum standard, of which the Huey is the equivalent in the helicopter world. And why that is will be shown in the forthcoming presentation. Here is the basic design of the Huey, and this basic design that is shown here is similar both for the 204 and 205 civilian models, as well as the UH-1, now known as the Huey, but originally designated as the HU-1, and that was how they derived the nickname Huey. And then when they changed it to the UH-1, they still stuck with the name Huey. Much like with those of you that follow the Strategic Air Command are aware of the B-1, it's referred to as the Bone, as an acronym for B-1. So Huey is the same way. Now what we're going to cover here in my presentation is I'm going to summarize for you some project information, then we're going to deconstruct the acronym of value, and then we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to incorporate some other fun thoughts into this. As you could probably guess from Greg's wonderful introduction, I try to incorporate not only finance and aviation, but also a little bit about pet therapy and also about faith. And so you'll get a little dose of that as we close out the presentation. So I want to begin by, again, citing the comparable that, like the DC-3, the Huey has been proven as a resilient, solidly profitable, world-renowned marketing brand. It's been probably the leading product line associated with the Textron Bell helicopter company since the 1950s, and it continues to be renowned, even though it's no longer in production. That is the original model. I do want to just cite, because I was speaking with one of the visitors here earlier, that the last Viper was just delivered to the United States Marine Corps, and that was one of the derivatives of the Huey. I'm going to talk about how that plays into the case study of value. But the key here when we look at the Huey, I think, from a finance perspective, is that if you are able to create a product that is able to generate a profit, that's a good thing, because profit is an indication of efficiency and a well-managed use of capital, financial, human, as well as physical capital. And this aircraft, which was started to fly in 1956 and continues to be active worldwide, embodies all the qualities that you'd like to see from both a financial perspective and an operational perspective. And again, just to place it in context, the DC-3 or C-47, it was over 22,000 produced, high volume. The Huey didn't reach quite that number, it's just under 17,000, but everything else they match up in the same way, serving in multiple theaters of war, and also doing comparable work in the civilian field as well. By the way, I just want to mention to all of you that anyone that is interested in this PowerPoint presentation, I have cards and my contact information here at the table. Pick it up. Send me an email and I will send you a copy of this presentation that you can have, because I would really like for you to have it. I don't want just Textron Bell to have it. I'd like everyone to have it, because I think it has a very important story to tell. Well, here's a summary of the project information. As I noted, the aircraft first flew in 1956, became operational in 59, used by all 4 armed services of our great nation. I've already mentioned to you how it acquired its nickname. Its production run lasted 31 years. And as I noted, its total number came just under 17,000, actually 16,500. Its peak production was during the Vietnam War. I mean, there were periods there where it was exceeding over 100 units per month during the Vietnam War, as we were churning them out for use by all branches of the service. And as noted here at the bottom of the slide, there's also the civilian models, the 204 and 205, which remain in active use and have engaged in a lot of various commercial and civilian applications. By the way, although I'm not a pilot, I did fly in a Huey, but it was a 204, 205, and that's when I was working as an analyst in Wall Street, and I was traveling in Japan at that point, and that was my experience with the Huey. I've never forgotten it, particularly when I had a chance to compare my experience with those that flew in combat. Quite an amazing whirlybird. So, added value. I took the information that was given. I won't go through all of the calculations, but essentially what it came down to was that the Huey's operating margin was essentially higher than its corporate average, and that shows a very efficient use of capital, because Textron is one of the first companies in America to base its financial decisions on return on invested capital. So the Huey, first and foremost, needed to show its resiliency from a financial perspective, which it obviously did. And you look at the numbers and you might say, well, 9% doesn't sound like very much, because that means that out of every dollar of sales, 9% is net earnings after tax. Doesn't sound like very much, particularly in today's high-tech age where knowledge-based industries have profit margins of 60, 70, 90%. And that's why I think a lot of people mistakenly disparage manufacturing companies, saying, oh, it can't be a very good business because look at its substandard margin. But you know what? If you make enough money to exceed your cost of capital, which Textron did, and if you sell enough of them, you can make a lot of profit. And if you make a lot of profit, guess what it does? It drives your stock price higher. And Textron was one of the great winners in the 1960s, and it continues to be a very wonderful investment today. And the Huey, was and is a part of that story. Even though it's not manufactured now, they still make parts and replacements for it. So it continues to be, as I said, a case study in efficiency and value. So let's begin with that first letter that makes up value, versatility. As I noted, it has both civilian as well as military applications. And this, I think, is the key for understanding why this has been such a long-lived asset. Because when you're serving two end-user markets, you're able to accrue stronger demand growth. You're able to provide diversification. And this is something here that I think is the secret sauce of my presentation today, which is identified here. This 65% number, which is going to be shown later in the presentation and part of my handouts that I'm going to leave with you today. But this 65% commonality ratio between the two variants, civilian and military, enable this to be one of the most successful aircraft of all time, not just in the helicopter world, but in the aviation world in general. This same 65% threshold is what made the Boeing 707 KC-135 successful. It's the same thing that has made other aircraft successful, and those that have not succeeded or have created consternation in the public eye have fallen below that. We'll talk about that in just a few moments here. But the key here is that this formula of strong demand growth, diversification, and commonality results in what we call economy of scale. Economy of scale. Some of you have heard about the learning curve. That is, the more frequently you engage in an activity and do it repetitively, you're able to do it better and at lower cost. We call that economy of scale, but that economy of scale is based on the triad of commonality of cost, diversification of end user markets, and having strong end user demand. Not one, not two, but all three. That's the only way you can accomplish economies of scale. Because you can produce a lot of it, but unless you have the demand for it, nothing has happened. As we say in business, until you make a sale, nothing has occurred. So the same thing applies here, even with military assets. So it's a very versatile aircraft, first and foremost. Second, it's adaptable. It's able to operate in all kinds of harsh environments while fulfilling specialty requirements on the military side. And why it's adaptable is because of its ease of operation, its ease of maintenance, large cabin doors that permit rapid entry and exit from the rotorcraft, and survivability. And that's something I'm sure a number of you here can talk about from a personal perspective. But adaptability is the key, I think, for an aircraft that is able to serve as long as it has. Now this brings us to longevity, which is based upon the versatility and the adaptability. But what you need to understand here from a financial perspective is that one of the most important things that we teach is that the longer an asset is in active use, the higher its return on investment. So therefore, all of the enormous costs associated with design and development are able to be spread out over a longer time frame. And because the aircraft is such a durable and versatile aircraft, it's what we call a fungible asset. It's transferable from one generation to the next. As I noted, the Huey has been able to serve in multiple theaters of war, whereas other aircraft that have had much shorter service lives can't make that claim. That's why the DC-3 was able to do what it did. And so even though it's no longer necessarily active as much as it was in the military side, it finds similar use in the civilian areas, firefighting, transport, and other such applications. And as a result of that, it's created a large replacement market for spare parts. And so it continues to be financially an important part of Textron Bell. Well, the last part, uncommon excellence. You know, when you have a superior engine design and you have a great airframe and a rotor system, you're able to do some things that end up saving lives, making a huge difference. And this is exemplified by the UH-1E that I point out here, that having a rescue hoist, aluminum instead of magnesium, rotor brakes, all of these things help to make the aircraft more versatile, more adaptable in environments. And a simple thing here is the rotor brake. It allows you to be stored and operated on a ship. People don't think about that because you got to be able to transport the whirlybird to its place of activity. So all of these little items here, the rescue hoist, aluminum, the rotor brake, electronic enhancements, all of these things are small things to be sure, but when you do small things in a big way, you end up having a great aircraft. And that's what I think what's great about Textron Bell, is that it's not so much that they did a big thing with the Huey, it's that they did a lot of little things in a big way that ended up creating a legacy aircraft that, as I said, for the storyline today, the DC-3 of the helicopter world. And so We have, I think, a story here that not only demonstrates great service to our nation, great service in the civilian area, but also a case study in economics and finance, because it demonstrates an efficient, well-run capital project. Well-run not only from an investor perspective, but equally important from a taxpayer perspective, from a public policymaker perspective. And finally, I think, as I always did in my work as an analyst, you look at client testimony. And I know some of you are here that I've spoken to just before the presentation have said that. And I have here a quote from a crew chief. He was a fellow, actually, that I met at the YMCA. He's now traveling worldwide, but I knew him for a number of years. And I think his quote here, that I have here in italicized font at the bottom, he said that this was the best job he ever had. And that he served in Vietnam, by the way. And because he worked for what is called a dust-off. And the dust-off aircrafts were the ones that were taking people from a better place. I mean, to a better place, rather, from a very difficult place. From being injured in the field and taking them to a place where they could be helped. And what I thought was amazing is that the way he described the action there, I could feel the heat, that unbearable heat. I could hear the signature sound of the Huey. And he said to me, he goes, "We never lost a single man or a patient." And he said, "Best job I ever had, most important job I've ever had." He said, "That was that's what I hang my hat on, is what I did in my life." And I said, "Well, Mark," I said, "you know, God has truly blessed you, and he blessed all those that benefited from your service." And so it's with that I come back to the financial side for a moment. For those of you that are interested in saying, well, how do you quantify all that? I have an appendix here that shows how I did that all. And what I want to point out here in looking at these numbers, what's not in these numbers is the incredible impact that this aircraft has had on multiple generations of people that used it in the field where lives were saved. How do you calculate the value of a life saved? You can't do it on a financial statement. And there are some other things that, from even those of you that are more technically inclined, are not reflected on that. And it's something that I call being a technology driver. Mr. Bell, who does his weekly Warbird videos, alluded to this in his most recent one on the Globemaster this past week, when he talked about the Douglas aircraft, the transport vehicles that they did. And some of them had difficulties. They didn't necessarily have the highest profitability or operating records, but they were important because they were technology drivers. Well, the Huey is not only a successful aircraft for all the reasons I said, but equally important, it was a major technology driver. Because the Vipers, the Cobras, which are still in operation, still used. Last one, as I said, was delivered to the Marines recently. Where do you think that came from? How do you think Textron and Bell were able to roll them out at the snap of a finger? It's because of these Huey aircraft. It was all the learning that went into that. And so there's a technology driver aspect that allows that to drive and create higher value that is not captured on the income statement or the balance sheet, but it is captured on the stock price. Very simple little calculation. Stock price is a function of two variables. It's a function of your net profit per share multiplied the multiple that you apply to that. Typically, we look at it this way. Higher quality enterprises get high multiples. Lower quality enterprises get lower multiples. If you get rising earnings and a rising multiple, you get what's called a double play. That's what made Textron such a big winner, because investors were able to look at the Huey, and not only did they see an efficient enterprise, 9%, but a lot of aircraft producing 9% on every sales dollar. But equally important, technology driver, creating multiple generations of other rotorcraft, like the Viper, like the Huey, the Cobra. that are still in use. And so this basis for calculating operating profit and value is just the start. How it translates into the qualitative side is where the science gives way to the art. As I always tell my students at the University of California, finance is a blend of science and art. And that's where the art comes into play. These are the references that went into the production of this piece. Background about yours truly, which Greg went over. And now we come to what I always enjoy with Fred's presentation, is the dedication portion. So I don't know what Greg told me here. Moxie original elixir, distinctively different. Well, I try to be distinctively different in my work, as I've done as an analyst, with the approach I've taken in studying aviation. But I would like to dedicate this opportunity to drink, first of all, in memory of those who gave their full devotion and service, not only in Vietnam, but in other venues of combat. So that's my first sip goes for that. I like it. There's not only a second sip, but another one thereafter. I want to also drink to all of those who have continued to serve and serve now, and those that intend to serve, like a family friend who's sitting here with us today. I'll drink to all of you as well, because without all of you, we wouldn't be able to enjoy the freedom that we are blessed to have. So to all of you, I'll take the second sip. And to the parents of those who served. Now I wanted to get back to this because this is some little goodies that I'm going to give for you to take away. Up here at the front, I've got this handout that you see on the screen here. I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but it's a two-sided handout that I'd like you to take with you. In fact, Greg's going to distribute that for me. Perfect. Why is this so important? Because, as I said to you earlier, what is the secret sauce is the 65% commonality of costs between the civilian and military variants, as shown in this Venn diagram. And I point this out because the other aircraft that comes to mind, well, two other aircraft that come to mind, the Boeing 707 and the KC-135, which basically changed the whole structure of strategic military command in terms of how air assets are used. That had the same ratio, 65 to 70%. And as you know, Boeing was a great stock price winner in the 1960s while the 707 and KC-135 were being produced. Same time that the Huey was being produced. Douglas Aircraft that produced the DC-3 and the C-47 that I referenced as the platinum standard, they had a ratio of about 70%. The C-47 is the military variant that we see here at the museum. The DC-3 is the C-47 is the military variant, the DC-3 is the civilian component, again, 65, 70%. Now, here's a fun thing. You all have heard about the F-35, Lightning. Amazing aircraft, does great things. When the F-35 was conceived, there was going to be, obviously there's three variants that are used, one by the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines. Lockheed originally had said, we're going to have a 75% commonality between all three of those. So we'll be able to fulfill all of the capital objectives without any difficulty. What do you think the ratio is for that? I heard 30%. Too high. 25%. And I don't mean to be critical of the Lockheed Corporation because I grew up next to the Skunk Works in Burbank in the 1960s when they were rolling out all those great aircraft. But the F-35, for all of its technical prowess and its wonderful capabilities that it will continue to deliver, financially has not been able to make the grade. 25%. Now that doesn't mean it's a bad aircraft, but it's something you need to keep in mind from a finance perspective in terms of how you're going to deploy your capital, how you're going to use your assets. Very important consideration. So anyway, I think this is a very important takeaway, and I think it'll be helpful to you whether you're an investor, whether you're just, I think, a good citizen. You want to know, how are your tax dollars being used? Are they being used efficiently? And obviously, you don't look at it just from a finance perspective, but it's another component, because as amazing as technology is, technology ultimately has to have a good home, a good end user market. It's got to be able to produce positive financial returns to accomplish positive economic added value. And I would include in that economic added value how it impacts human lives, as we've talked about with the Huey. So one other takeaway. My little helper, which is standing in the back there with my beloved wife, Callie the California girl, she's our corgi, she's a retired AKC champion show dog, is with us here today, quite excited, maybe a little bit too excited. But she has a namesake aircraft that is parked right outside the door, the F-106 Delta Dart, California girl. And we've got some commemorative bookmarks for you here. It has that, and on the back it has the aircraft as well. So please, when you come up, be sure to take some bookmarks with you to give to your family and friends or anyone else. And also, on the back of that, it's got the aircraft itself, plus my contact information. And I've also got some European-style business cards featuring the Huey aircraft. Take some of those as well. They double as bookmarks. But I invite all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got a following of about 1,300 people, and it's growing every day. But I publish a lot on military aviation. I'd love to connect with you. And if you're interested in other works that I've done, if you send me an email, I will direct you to those websites. And then the other item that I wanted to mention, that if you like the work that's been done here, I've also included the business card of the design and developer of that. I promised her I would, because her friends serve in the United States Air Force as boom operators on the KC-46. So I said, well, I'll do a little shout out for them as well. So you'll help them by helping her as well. So take her card with you. I want to open it up to Q&A if anyone has anything that they'd like to ask. But before doing so, I had said to you I'd like to incorporate finance, aviation, pets. Well, I've done those. But you probably wondered, how is he going to incorporate faith, other than maybe the references he makes now and then in the context of his presentation? Well, one of the people that I interviewed flew a Huey in the Middle East in the Gulf War. So he gave me his bandana as Psalm 91, the warrior psalm. Those of you who are familiar with some of its content, 1,000 shall fall at thy side and 10,000 at thy right. This was worn in combat. In fact, you can even kind of see it bears the scars of combat. On the back of that, Saint Michael, protect us. And so he gave me that because of the work I do, not only in military aviation, but in ministry. So I have that here, and I would like to share that with you as well.